In today's video, we're looking at the greatest watches ever to be featured in popular movies. From James Bond to Mission Impossible to American Psycho, all the classics, we're going to be going over all the watches that were featured in each movie. Before we start this video, I just want to give a special thank you to George Harris, or G Harris 1992. He replied to my message in the Chisholm Hunter Watches Family group chat. That's on Instagram if you want to join that. And he basically suggested to do this video. So thank you guys so much for all the support and the suggestions. I really appreciate it. And also, spoilers for these movies are ahead, so you have been warned. No. Okay, let's start. Anticlimactic. Let's start with Interstellar, not James Bond. Let's start with Interstellar. So in the movie Interstellar, we dive into a world that is rapidly deteriorating, and humanity's last hope is essentially to find another planet. Matthew McConaughey, the handsome hunk himself, is the astronaut in charge of finding this new planet and colonizing this new planet, but he wants to make it back to Earth because he wants to spend time with his family. He doesn't want to spend too long away. And long story short, he's been lied to, and he's going to spend a lot more time away than he thinks. And in order to communicate with back home, he uses this. This is the Hamilton khaki fueled Murph, a watch that was bespoke, a watch that was designed solely for Christopher Nolan for this movie. Now, an interesting fact is that Christopher Nolan and Hamilton actually talk regularly, and whenever he wants a watch for a movie, whether it's Oppenheimer or Interstellar, whatever it might be, he goes to Hamilton to design these watches for the movie. So this watch was totally unique, and when it was released to the public as the Murph watch, it actually had the Morse code on the second hand, which said Eureka, which, if you've seen the movie, is very, very important. Since its release, it's become so popular that we've had the Murph Mini, we've also had the Murph Mini White Dial, and a couple of different iterations of straps, and I would argue that that's probably going to keep happening to that Murph range because of the popularity. I actually think it should be a standalone range in itself, not Hamilton khaki fueled Murph, but just Murph. That's my personal opinion, though. But that has to be one of the most brilliant watch features in a movie. At number 2, we finally get to James Bond. We get to James Bond, No Time to Die, the latest iteration of the franchise, which is James Bond featuring Daniel Craig. And Daniel Craig, to me, is the James Bond. He's the guy I grew up with. He is the James Bond to me, but I know that a lot of your guys' James Bonds might be slightly different. Let me know in the comments who your James Bond is. Interesting fact about James Bond before we actually go on to the watch. I believe that Omega have just by accident leaked the new James Bond. Aaron Taylor Johnson, the handsome hunk himself, has just been signed to Omega as one of their new ambassadors. So I do believe that Aaron Taylor Johnson is going to be the next James Bond because he's now Omega's ambassador. I don't think they'd spend the money willy-nilly. I do think that they're doing that on purpose because that is going to be an announcement to come very, very soon. Now in James Bond No Time to Die, he wears this, the Omega Seamaster 300 meters in full titanium. And everything about this watch screams military. It screams stealth, even down to the metal they've used. I mean, titanium itself is a darker metal, it's lightweight, it's durable, and everything is quite muted within this watch. And what specifically I like about this watch a lot is the fact that they've not gone overboard with James Bond memorabilia on the watch. Someone that doesn't enjoy James Bond or hasn't watched James Bond could still buy this Seamaster without being overloaded with James Bond stuff. Does that make sense? So yeah, super cool Seamaster, and I do anticipate when they discontinue this, because they eventually will, it will actually rise in value because it was Daniel Craig's Seamaster in James Bond. Daniel Craig's no longer there, and if they discontinue this, it's got a nostalgic kind of connection to that movie. Interestingly enough, when it comes to this Seamaster as well, Daniel Craig himself had a hand in designing it, which is also why I think potentially it will rise in value once it's discontinued, which inevitably will happen. But it's really cool that he actually had a hand himself in designing it. Right, next up, we have another James Bond movie, but this time it's from Sean Connery.
Bond. James Bond.
It's Dr. No, and of course Sean Connery plays the man himself, James Bond. But he wears this. This is the Rolex Submariner reference 6538, and it has that iconic red arrow, that kind of red bit on the bezel at the top, which we could see actually in the Tudor Black Bay range. Now obviously this watch was worn before Omega actually became the sponsors of James Bond, and the original watch worn by Connery was actually on a NATO strap. Going one step further to a watch that you never thought would be in the James Bond movies, this is the Seiko 0674 LC, and it was worn by Roger Moore in The Spy Who Loved Me in 19 1977. Now, this watch definitely looks that little bit more futuristic. It's definitely outside the norm of James Bond watches, and I can understand why they've used this specific model. And it is quite interesting that James Bond history goes way beyond just Omega, although that's what people think of subconsciously when they think of James Bond now. It goes to Seiko, it goes to Rolex, it goes to a bunch of others. Right, we'll get off of James Bond just after this one. I do believe that James Bond should have worn something in particular. I think he should have worn the Summit collection from Chisholm Hunter. This is a collection of jewellery, gents jewellery, that is the perfect pairing to your luxury watch. And it's actually a collection that I designed myself. So if you want to shop for the Summit jewellery collection, then head to chisholmhunter.co.uk. That is chisholmhunter.co.uk. We're also authorised retailers of a ton of different watches, but specifically my thing right now, because I designed it, is the Summit collection. Take a look. And now we get on to the next movie, which is Le Mans. And the handsome hunk himself, Steve McQueen, actually wore the Tag Heuer monocle. Now, technically at this point, Heuer and Tag were still standalone companies. So it was actually the Heuer monocle later to become the Tag Heuer monocle. And it's quite interesting. If you look at the specific watch, you can see monocle and then you can see Heuer, but there's no tag in sight, which is kind of weird because obviously they're now the same company. But yeah, they were standalone before. An interesting fact is that this was the first square cased automatic watch, and McQueen actually modeled his character after real racing legend Joe Siffer. Apocalypse Now was a huge movie for its time in around about the late 1970s. And Martin Sheen was also an absolutely gigantic actor. Now, this movie was very popular, and thus the watch that was in it was also very popular. This is the Seiko 6105, which came to be known as the Captain Willard, after Martin Sheen's character. Now, interestingly enough, real soldiers in Vietnam actually used to use this watch, and that's why he used it in the movie. So there is a genuine connection, there's military ties there, and it is a super cool watch, but it's just not the one that I would go for. It's just too prominent, would you say? I'm not sure. I think it's cool, but it's too much for me. At number 8, we have Men in Black. And this is actually a movie or movies that I've fallen out of love with. And the reason being is because of Will Smith. The fact that he slapped Chris Rock on stage at the Oscars, I think is absolutely disgusting. I think the fact that people stood up and applauded is absolutely disgusting, to be perfectly frank. But it is an iconic movie. It is an iconic watch. This is the Hamilton Ventura. It looks futuristic. It looks Men in Black-like. It looks like it's from another planet. Now, interestingly, Elvis also wore the Ventura, so it does have a really rich history. And I do love the fact that it's portrayed in this movie, because Hamilton is a brand that I love, and it is a cracking watch. I mean, it looks so uniquely Hamilton. At number 9 is an interesting one. So in the books of American Psycho, Patrick Bateman wears a Rolex. It's all about image. It's all about portrayal. It's all about who has the next best thing. But in the movie, he actually wears a Seiko. Specifically this Seiko. It's the Seiko SNJ X90. Now, it does look remarkably like a Rolex Datejust, but it's not. It is a Seiko. And actually, although it's different from the books, I quite like the fact that they've used that, even if it was a mistake, even if they weren't legally allowed to use Rolex. I think it's quite cool that they did use a Seiko, because it's all about the image, isn't it, in this movie? It's all about the way that people perceive you and see you. It's all about status. And it's almost like because he's trying to pretend to have a Rolex, it makes more of a statement than him actually having a Rolex. The next one on the list is a action movie. It's packed full of Chris Hemsworth looking handsome and shooting people. This is Extraction 2, and the watch he used, the genuine military, rugged, tough watch he used was this. This is the Casio G-Shock GW9400-3, and it's the Rangeman, and it specifically came in green. Now, this is a watch that can do it all. Casios are the military watches, or G-Shocks rather, are the military watches, because they literally are indestructible. I took a Casio Mudmaster to Finland a long time ago, had it in -30, and it passed every test we put it through. So I think that there's a definite brilliant correlation between military and G-Shock and Casio. I think is a good placement for that watch. I wasn't as much of a fan of the movie. It was cool, but it was a bit, him just looking handsome and killing people. At number 11, we have Batman Begins. And Batman, or what's his name, Christian Bale, that plays Batman in Batman. It's been a long day. He wears this. This is a JLC reversal. And of course, the portrayal of Batman is by day one way and by night another. And that's what this watch represents. He can switch the face of this watch round to his other personality almost. That's the kind of vibe they were going with. Also, it makes total sense that the ultra rich, that would be Batman in this case, would get a JLC because they are genuine works of art. This watch and JLC in general are so underrated, it's criminal. Right, rewinding to 1986, and that is when the first Aliens movie came out. The one where the popped out the stomach of the... It was an awesome Aliens, and since then there's been tons of iterations of the movie, none of which, in my eyes, lived up to the original. I think the original was the best. I mean, they just started throwing tons of aliens at people, and they were killing hundreds of them, and it just wasn't as scary. I think the first one was the best. Now, in this movie, they used this, the Seiko 7A28-7000, commonly known or nicknamed as the Ripley. And looking at this watch right now, I mean, they definitely nailed the futuristic element to this watch. Would I ever wear it? Probably not. I mean, the square coming off the side, there's some weird vibes going on here, but it's iconic because of that. It's iconic because it's so different. And I appreciate things that are different because at the end of the day, watches are art. Watches are subjective, just like art. So something that I hate might be something that somebody else loves. And that's part of the reason why I love this industry. So although this watch isn't for me, you can't deny it's an icon. Up next is another interesting one. We've all seen The Wolf of Wall Street. I honestly fell in love with Margot Robbie in that movie, if I'm totally honest. I think I watched it when I was like 19. I was like, oh my God, Margot Robbie. But anyway, enough of her. When we look at Leonardo DiCaprio, he actually wears a Tag Heuer 1000, which is gold plated. Now, typically Jordan Belfort actually wore Rolexes, but in this movie, because Leo was sponsored to Tag Heuer, he was an ambassador of Tag Heuer, he had to wear Tag Heuer. This is a gold-plated Tag Heuer, and it just screams of everything that this movie stands for, doesn't it? It is greed on a humongous scale, and it's actually crossing the line between legal and illegal. And it's showing everybody that you have tons of money and all the kind of narcissistic stuff that he was doing at that time. So yeah, it's an interesting story, the fact that it should have been a Rolex, but actually Leo was sponsored by Tag, etc., etc. Next on the list, we have Jason Statham in The Transporter. Now, in The Transporter, and Jason Statham is probably the only guy that would get away with this watch. He wears this. This is the Panerai Luminor Marina, and it's absolutely stunning. It is a beautiful watch, and because he's a big guy, because he's a big muscular guy, he definitely suits this specific model, especially within this movie. I mean, he's playing a guy that does drives for people, and he sticks to rules, and then eventually he looks in a bag and finds that it's a really hot girl, and he essentially falls in love with the girl and tries to save her. It's all about him just being a badass, and this watch is that. It is badass. At number 15, we have, where is the diamond, Solomon Vandy? Where is the diamond? Do you see a diamond here? What am I trying to say? His blood diamond. I remember watching that in Sri Lanka like 2 years ago and thought it was just epic. Both of the main characters' portrayals were incredible. Now, Leo DiCaprio in this movie plays a smuggler of diamonds. He's a pretty horrible person, to be honest. He's a liar, he's a thief. He does become good in the end, but hey ho. The handsome man himself, Leo DiCaprio, wears a Breitling Chrono Avenger. This watch comes in solid titanium, has a 44mm case width or case diameter, so it is quite chunky, and it comes on a brown calfskin leather strap. The exact model worn by Mr. DiCaprio was actually the Breitling Chrono Avenger Titanium Automatic E13360. The dial features a 3 o'clock date window, Arabic numerals, and 3 chronograph sub-dials. The watch has white hour and minute hands and a white and red lollipop second hand. And it just fits this movie absolutely to a T. All right, next on the list, we have First Man, the movie about Neil Armstrong being the first man to walk on the moon, and I'm sure you guys can probably guess what watch is featured, so I won't spend too much time on it, but it is the Omega Speedmaster Moonwatch. It of course makes total historical sense. It fits the bill perfectly for this movie because Omega, the Moonwatch, was the first watch, you guessed it, on the moon. Next on the list is an absolutely iconic genius movie from Steven Spielberg himself. This is it's Jaws. In Jaws, the main man actually wore one of these. This is the Alsta Nautoscaphe. Now, the watch he actually wears in this movie is pretty unique. It has a cushion cut case. It has a really bizarre bracelet, if I'm totally honest. I can't really get on board with it, but at the same time, I've never seen anything like it. It has a fully rotating bezel, and it looks pretty vintage inspired. Next up, we have another James Bond classic in Live and Let Die. And in this movie, he wears a really futuristic looking Hamilton. This is the Hamilton Pulsar LED, and it's actually the first digital LED watch showing red numbers at the push of a button. Again, it was very futuristic for its time. It was very James Bond spy. You'd expect you to press a button and a missile comes out of it or something. It's that kind of watch. But I think as James Bond's progressed, it gets more into the mechanical luxury element of watches instead of the cool, darts and tranquilizers coming out of your watch. Next up is one for all you Marvel lovers. It is Doctor Strange with Benedict Cumberbatch. Now, he's actually an ambassador for JLC, or he was an ambassador. I think he still is an ambassador for JLC. So in this movie, he wears this, the JLC Master Ultra Thin Perpetual Calendar. Now, interestingly enough, his watch actually cracks during his car crash, and this symbolizes the shattering of time and his ego. It was actually a really brilliant prop in the movie because they actually, instead of you seeing it out of the corner of your eye, they really featured this watch in the movie. Like you have a proper head-on shot of this watch, although they did crack it, which kind of sucks, but yeah, it's a cool prop. Now, the man himself, Tom Cruise, has been in a role recently because he's just promoting his new movie, which I think launched as I'm filming this, maybe today, which is Mission Impossible: The Final Reckoning. But that's not the one we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about the first ever Mission Impossible. In the first ever Mission Impossible, Tom Cruise, or Ethan Hunt rather, wears this. This is the Casio DW290-1V. Staying true to the military roots, staying true to the military feel of this movie, it's appropriate that he has a military-inspired, durable, rugged, tough watch. And that is the greatest watches ever to be featured in movies. Let me know what you think in the comments. If you agree, if you disagree, please hit that subscribe button if you did enjoy. Follow our Instagram at Chisholm Hunter Watches, my Instagram at HP Lifelens, or the podcast, the Into the Mind podcast. And I'll see you guys real soon.